Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. We are breaking down week 4. I'm Jamie Calandro at JAC3600, joined as always by my handsome and football knowledgeable co-host Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav. Eric, how's it going tonight?
It's going well. Glad to have you back, Jamie. And week 4 should be an interesting slate, right? I think it's all but 3 games are within 3.5 points of each other. So not exactly the kind of runaways that we've seen through some of the early weeks of the season. So makes for a totally different approach to the DFS slate.
Yeah, for sure. There's some interesting ones this week, especially with the injuries, which we will get to all of that. But first, as you kind of alluded to, I wasn't here for week 3. I'm a teacher, and we were sponsoring the homecoming dance that night. So instead of breaking down DFS, I was chaperoning 300 teenagers. Give or take. So I think it's pretty clear which I'd rather be doing on a Saturday night is talking football with you. But we didn't really talk. So how did your week 3 go? Did you have a successful one? I did not, and I'll tell you why. But you go ahead.
So on aggregate, I did okay. Generally speaking, I don't think the slate played out the way that I was anticipating it to. But by happenstance, the areas where I was in larger tournaments were the ones where I did moderately better. So I was right about even. I was probably down a couple of shekels.
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, the Montgomery injury destroyed me kind of right off the bat, and I almost made up for it even after all that. But I did a little bit of late pivoting in that week. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was a week ago, but when Montgomery got hurt and somebody else, I think Diggs kind of busted for his ownership. I was kind of hoping to get a little bit of a leverage play. So the late players I had, I pivoted. And just to kind of do a prayer to get into min cash, and it was between 2 and 2, and the 2 I picked were terrible, and if I had stuck with the other 2, I actually would have made it. So on to another week. And like you said before, we've got some really, really cool matchups, some potential values based on the injuries. Before we get to that, though, we do have we are live, on our YouTube channel on Football Diehards. So we are talking about the slate, but I mean, come with your questions. They can be season long, they can be DFS. We love when people ask us questions in the middle of the show, and helping you win cash or GPPs, or even just your week in your league. So don't be shy with the questions in YouTube. We'll get to them as quickly as we can. We do have a 9:30 game tomorrow. That's always fun. 9:30. Well, I don't know what it is for you. Where are you again? I always forget. You're on the East Coast with me, right?
Close-ish. I'm in Texas, so it's 8:30 for me.
Okay, so
close from a time standpoint.
Okay, so I mean, what's better than that? I mean, you wake up to a game early in the morning. When that's done, you finish setting your lineups, and then we get 7 hours of commercial free, as they say, or as Scott Hansen says, I should say. So before we get into the main slate, I don't know if you play showdowns, but I always do. So and especially for the season long, we got some Minnesota and New Orleans stuff, and we got some key injuries in that game. So is there anything that just stands out to you overall? It doesn't have to be cash, GPP, or season long, but anything in that game that stands out to you, which is worth mentioning to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I generally like to either fade or kind of play the unders on the London games. I think it's 4 out of the last 5 games have come in under the projected line, and the margin of victory there is like 10 points. So they're kind of like low scoring, one-sided affairs. So in showdown, I find myself with a lot of kickers, a lot more defenses, specifically in showdown cash. Like I love like the double quarterback, double kicker builds whenever I'm projecting a game to come under. And in just about every kind of prop or pick'em app out there, I'm generally playing the unders for tomorrow's slate, the island slate, I should say.
You bet in Texas, Eric?
We cannot. So my prop wagers are limited to the fine folks at Prize Picks and Underdog and the like.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It's always so worrisome. I supposedly the last thing I hear is, I actually have a friend that works in the Senate here in Maine, and he says that the governor has signed off. So I think it's just kind of dotting the i's and crossing the t's now. So I'm hoping we get it soon because I'm ready to jump right into that with both feet as well. Um, so yeah, so I'm with you. I agree with what you said there about as showdown stuff goes. I do think this is a good week again for double defense. Also, when you're looking at one side, the Saints have really been good at limiting what the Vikings tend to offer. They've shut down wide receiver ones thus far. So it's a tough matchup. I mean, Jefferson is Jefferson, but it's a tough matchup for him on the perimeter, likely getting a lot of Marshawn Lattimore there. They've stopped the run fairly effectively as well. Then on the other side of the ball, we've got both Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston out. So we're going to be looking at Andy Dalton starting. So I think there's you alluded to the under, and I think there's a lot of possibilities that both defenses could be at an optimal lineup if you do play those showdown slates. So it'll be a fun one. I think that's a good one for a London game. Those are two enjoyable teams, should be in the mix to the very end here. So at least we're not getting Bears. I was gonna say the Jaguars, but they're they're respectable so far this year.
Jaguars
What's a
would be
good
great.
example? Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. They got some fireworks there.
Yeah.
What do you think
I'm
about
kind of
Chris Olave?
curious with the prime time narrative around Kirk Cousins. If this is like the most opposite of prime time, if he just has like a career game they're in Tottenham right this week.
Yep. 9:30 a.m. and not in the country. Yeah, I mean that's not technically prime time, I suppose. Yeah, that'd
Right.
be fun to listen to. What's your thought on Chris Olave?
Yeah, I think he's definitely the ascending talent in this Saints offense, right? He's certainly someone that I'm holding in redraft. I would like to say I'm trying to acquire him, but it seems like his price tag is pretty expensive. So not going to go out and get very many new shares. But he was one of my favorite targets coming out of the draft. There were plenty of mocks and best balls that we did. Rookies only following the draft, and he was my third wide receiver off the board. So he absolutely annihilates man coverage. We saw that a lot at Ohio State. He's doing that and starting to bring that to the NFL level. And I think, very quickly he is going to be the wide receiver one for the New Orleans Saints.
Well, good for you for that. I mean, I was in the opposite boat. I was skeptical on him, and he didn't find his way into many of my draft selections. I hit the London pick pretty well, but I mean, it would have been nice to because he's looking great as well. But I mean, it would have been nice to have Olave here. He's got a 32, almost a 33% target share over the last 2 weeks, and now with Michael Thomas out. Not really an imposing secondary for Minnesota. I mean, Patrick Peterson still looks like he has some juice, but he's not like he was. So, I mean, I think we get a big Olave game as well too. All right, so yeah, so that's the showdown that we're looking at right now. Enjoy that. I mean, wherever you are in the time in the country, you're getting a nice time to watch some football and lead up to the 1 o'clock games or whatever it is you call them. That's noon for you, right? Football kicks off then. So you say the noon games.
Me,
I
yeah.
have such trouble saying that. All right, awesome. So let's see. We got a question in there. So I think let's take it before we get to everything. I mean, there's going to be a lot of players in this lineup. Robert Ferenc, one of our listeners, is posting their cash lineup in there. So we got Josh Allen, Jamal Williams, Najee Harris, CeeDee Lamb, Josh Reynolds, Josh Palmer, David Njoku, Saquon Barkley in the flex, and the Giants defense. I mean, for me, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of players on this thing. I wrote a cash article for Football Diehards this week, and kind of a little write-up for fantasy team advice to the other site that I'm on, and a lot of those players were included in it. So I'm liking it. I'm not the biggest Najee Harris fan just because it looks like the naysayers on him are a little bit correct with the fact that Jaylen Warren is stealing touches from him. I think at his price tag, he's still okay in the cash format. Is there anybody in that lineup that stood out to you that you wouldn't play in a cash lineup, or does that look pretty good to you?
That seems pretty solid to me, right? The concerns around Najee Harris are fair, right? Like he hasn't and presumably won't be hyper efficient in his the young part of his career. So he really has to get a ton of volume. So if a little bit of that work is ceded to Jalen Warren, that creates some issue. I think that was more to do with them playing on a Thursday game with him coming off of at least a couple of bumps and bruises where they gave Warren a bit more work. So definitely a storyline that I'm watching. If we see another game where Warren's getting more than just a handful of touches, then maybe cause for concern with Harris. But in terms of week number 4, a lot of guys that are really strong points per dollar, a lot of guys that have pretty well established roles in their offense, and those are all the makings of cash game targets for me.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a follow-up question there. He's asking, would you go Herbert instead? I assume that's Khalil Herbert and change the Giants defense. I think that would be fine, but I don't think you need to either. Herbert is in my current cash placeholder. I don't often like to do opposing running backs in the same game. Like you have Barkley there too. I think though in this case that, and we'll get to that game, but if there's any game you can do that, it's this one. Two teams that are both going to lean heavily on the run. I don't think you need to. I think it's fine if you do, but I think you're good. Robert, I think you're good with what you have. I mean, would you change that to Herbert and play? Use that
No,
money
I would lean on the
Giants?
side of Najee, right? Like
Mhm.
it feels like there's always a week or two where it's just backup city, and inevitably a couple of them don't live up to the hype that they walk into the week with, right? So to have essentially all of those backup running backs in a single lineup, it's just a little bit riskier than I want to have for a cash build.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's going to be a big piece of this thing. That we're looking at ownership, and it's looking like Herbert and Jamal Williams are going to be the chalk. And
Way up
I
there.
think you hit the nail right on the head there. When we get to these games, we can break that down a little more. But it's Jamal Williams. I think is a little bit different because he's been involved anyway, and he's been the goal line back even with Swift playing. So he's had a lot of value. But I mean, you're right. In essence, they're both backup running backs, and they're technically backups for a reason. So I think people are going to jump all over that value, but you do lessen the floor when you're playing a bunch of backups in the thing. I think that's a great point. So I mean, we'll definitely get to that. We'll get to that game. Um, so we have another question, and this is a good one because it's going to lead us into the first game we're actually going to break down. So the question from David Guest: what about weather issues in Baltimore tomorrow? Is there any case to fade Allen or Jackson? Could be a mess on the East Coast. Yeah. So we're going to get into that game right now, David, and we'll break that down for you because I mean, from a DFS standpoint, this is going to be the most popular game on the slate. This is the most fantasy friendly from a fantasy and from a DFS standpoint. I'm trying to find the most recent over under and team totals. This is as of 5 o'clock Eastern time today. We got the Bills with a team total of 27 and the Ravens with a team total of 24 and over under of 51. I don't know if you've seen any movement on that, maybe based on the weather, Eric.
I haven't, no. I've seen them kind of parked at 51 for a while. For me, it seems like weather doesn't really move the line too much until we get into either very heavy snow season or more specifically when there are prevailing winds that are sustained above like 25 miles an hour. So while it might be stormy there, I don't think that we're looking at winds quite that high yet. So haven't seen the line move.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree. And to answer that question kind of quickly, the weather's not making me move off this game. But let's take a look at the individual plays here. So we've got Josh Allen currently projecting to be. I'm scrolled away for a second. Where are my quarterbacks? I think, yeah, he's currently projected as the highest rostered quarterback of the week, and rightfully so. I mean, the guy is the guy. The guy is the quintessential QB1 now, just based on what he does with his legs and his arms. He's facing a Baltimore pass defense that made Tua be the QB2 in that big shootout. Mac Jones was QB9 last week. They are not the Baltimore defense that we've seen. Paired off, any Josh Allen success is dragging Stephon Diggs along with him. Again, I can name the last players that have just played against Baltimore. I mean, we had Tyreek go for 11, 190 and 2. We had Waddle go for 11, 171 and 2. Devontae Parker went over 150 yards receiving. Corey Davis looked like a wide receiver one. I mean, it's not just the stars here. So Allen Diggs, I mean, I think is about the highest floor ceiling combination you could put from anybody on the slate there. Are you with me on that one, or is the price too high for you at this point?
Yeah, so the price isn't too high for me. I'm a little concerned with just how popular these two are projected to be, right? Like I guess I should say I was anticipating the price to scare people off more than it looks like it will. Stacking these two up, kind of coming into the week with them both being at or near the top of their price tag in their respective positions, usually that's a good way to get a relatively low owned stack. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this week. So I'll have plenty of those builds. I'm probably going to try to go a little bit underweight on stacking those two players together specifically, though.
I am 100% with you, and I'm glad you brought that up because I thought the same thing was going to happen, that, people would look to Lamar Jackson, who is currently, all the talk of Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson is averaging over 5 more DraftKings points per game than Allen. And
Right.
the fact that he's $100 cheaper, I was really expecting, even with the Bills' injuries, I thought that Jackson was going to come in higher roster than Allen, and it's just not the case. So I think the most direct pivot off that in this game is to make the Ravens be the stacked team and bring it back with Diggs or even Devin Singletary. I think that's a nice sneaky play too, because all of a sudden, we were worried about him splitting time when they drafted James Cook, and the fact that Zach Moss was effective at the beginning of the year. Again, we saw Singletary just take a stranglehold on that backfield last week. He had 18 touches, he had 11 targets, 73% snap share. He ran 45 routes, and neither Cook nor Moss had double digits. So I think that's an interesting way to gain some leverage on this too. Do you have any Ravens stacks tomorrow?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. Like I want to get into this game, but there aren't a ton of stacks that are really jumping off the page for me. I think the conundrum is just how popular Mark Andrews is projected to be. There are projections that have him as high as like 19 or 20% rostered, right? So like to have the most expensive player on the board or near that price tag who's going to be that popular, like it's hard for me to want to stack and have a lot of exposure to him. And the secondary Baltimore pieces, like there are some questions around here, right? Like Rashad Bateman, his snap share is falling week over week, right? Not to mention that this Buffalo secondary is very, very tough at all three positions. And you take a guy like Bateman, who's now right around 60% snap share. I don't know if I want to get up to that price tag, to that mid 5K. There's other options around there that I think are better. Honestly, I probably come underweight in terms of my overall exposure to this game. Where I'm stacking the Ravens, I really like to target Duvernay. He actually outsnapped Bateman last week, and very much so has a skill set that he can take advantage of a broken coverage or two, and put up a pretty impressive day. So I think where I'm stacking Baltimore, I like Lamar and Duvernay more than anyone else. Specifically in the GPP context, I should say. There are a lot of cash game players to like here. The run back for me is absolutely Stephon Diggs. I mean, he is going to feast on Jalen Amore Davis. Amore Davis allows like 90% of his targets to be hauled in. He's allowing like almost 20 yards per catch, over 5 yards per route that he covers. Like he's just an absolute smash spot. I expect Diggs to see him more than anybody else. So Diggs is in a fantastic spot, but I'm not loving the different player combinations out of this game in particular.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I agree with you on Diggs. You know, I mean, his even if they did have someone that could kind of slow him down, his route running is just so precise that it doesn't
I know.
matter what they throw at Diggs. And I was a little bit under the consensus on him coming into this year, just because Gabe Javis's emergence at the end of last year, and just the fact that Diggs had some inconsistent game logs last year, I was kind of dropping him below into that wide receiver like 6, 7, 8 range coming into this season, when some of our colleagues had him as high as wide receiver 2 and 3, and that looks like it was a miss on my part. I mean, in that offense, I think he's going to sustain this. I'm with you on Duvernay. You know, a funny thing is, when I was building these stacks before, I had a Lamar Jackson Andrews stack, and I put Diggs in there, started building the rest of the lineup out, and I kind of got something I was happy with. And then the last spot was a $4,100 in the wide receiver spot. I was like, all right, I mean, here comes more Richie James. And I
Bingo,
looked, and
bango, right?
there's Duvernay. There's Duvernay. So it turned right into a double stack, which, and then I read and I saw the stuff you were talking about with Duvernay's snap share and everything. And I like it. I think, and in the special teams, he gets those points too. So I like it. Anything else on this game before we move on?
No, I think that really touches it. Dawson Knox will be in the player pool, but I'm not making him a priority. Singletary, I agree with you. Like, I think he's an interesting way to get into this game. I was kind of surprised where his ownership is landing. Like, I feel like he's just like perpetually overlooked. So to see him, north of 6%, between 6 and 8, like that feels like it's a little bit too much. But he certainly stepped into that lead back role that you want to see. But there's just kind of some oddities about this game overall, to where I'll probably have like some correlated mini stacks, right? Kind of, stack around a couple other games and run back with, a Diggs and a Duvernay, or a Singletary and an Andrews kind of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've been playing it as well. And again, I mean, I should probably point out too that if you are looking at Bill's targets, not that you should discount some of them, but I mean, Josh Allen did throw the ball 60 times last week too, which is
Insane.
a bit of an
So
anomaly.
much.
So you can't chase you can't chase target shares again like that this week, even in what looks like it could be a high scoring affair. All right, awesome. So that's Bills Ravens, I think, as best as we can explain it. So let's kind of take a look at some of the other ones, because there are some fun ones around here. The next one I kind of want to get into here is the Atlanta Cleveland, and a big reason is the guy that I have hung my hat on the entire week, and that's Marcus Mariota. So I'm gonna lead in with this, and you can tell me where you stand on him, if you think I am way overreacting on what I think he's going to be this week, but I'll do it very quickly. So first of all, I mean, this game, Atlanta Cleveland, from a DFS and fantasy standpoint, is, after Bills Ravens, one of the better ones we've got on this slate. It's quietly got an over under that's pushing 50. It's slightly under. We're looking at about 49, 49.5, and 48.5 somewhere. Still good fantasy material there. But Mariota, I mean, he's the QB 13 right now, and he's really showing the ability to run an efficient offense there. He does have turnovers, which is never a good thing, especially if a team is going to start failing and they have a rookie quarterback that could be thrown in at any time if they think they're going to pack the season in. But I mean, Mariota is doing really, really well this year. They're not going to have Myles Garrett, and they're not going to have what's his name? It's escaping me at the moment right now. Their defensive tackle. I'll think of it. But the two very prolific defenders on the front line for Cleveland are out in this one. Drake London has been a revelation. Kyle Pitts was re-involved last week. Cordarrelle Patterson is all of a sudden, for some reason, getting over 20 touches a game, which I didn't think was going to happen either. And the thing with Mariota is he's got his legs. The fact that he will run and he's got that floor. I love rushing quarterbacks in DFS because even if they bust through the air and are inefficient, they can get it done on the ground. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns. He's carried the ball 25 times through 3 weeks. I have him, and here's where you can step in and pull the reins in. I have him as the QB7 this week, ahead of people such as, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Kyler Murray, who I have at 8. Kirk Cousins in tomorrow's game I have below Mariota. So that's my sell. I'm saying it right now. He's my cash quarterback for sure. I certainly endorse paying up for Josh Allen, but I'm not doing it. I'm sticking with Mariota and taking that money savings and putting it to the skill players. So Eric Romoff, where are you on Mariota?
Yeah, I'm not mad at that call, and specifically with regard to the players that the Browns have out, right? You mentioned Myles Garrett, Taven Bryan is the D tackle that you were searching for there. So, I mean, this Browns front has been pretty disruptive through 3 weeks of the season. So, if you're going to get a circumstance that is more favorable, or I guess less unfavorable from a defensive standpoint, certainly points the arrow up for Marcus Mariota. The thing that I like most about Mariota, you mentioned how involved he is on the ground. That is by design. He is tied for 3rd in terms of the number of designed runs among quarterbacks in the league this year. So they very much so want to get him involved. And specifically, the matchup's kind of breaking away where I think we can see them leaning on the ground game and the underneath game a lot more. And I think actually potentially designing even more runs than they do on average, right? They're right around 3.5 per game. Maybe they get them, closer to 4 or 5. So, definitely appreciate the point of view. And I do tend to agree. I think he's definitely on the cash radar. I kind of think this game might get a little bit uglier than it looks like Vegas is projecting. So I probably won't have a whole lot of Mariota from a GPP perspective, but in terms of his ability to get to value at tag and the litany of things you can do with the rest of your build with that savings, because basically in cash, it's Lamar, it's Josh Allen, it's Jalen Hurts. So you're getting Marcus Mariota at like a 35, 38% discount relative to those guys. You can do a lot of really good things with the rest of your roster with that. So definitely appreciate the cash call there.
Yeah, and I agree with you and thank you for not telling me that I'm an idiot. But I agree with the GPP call as well. I mean, from a money standpoint, they are fairly easy to stack if you want to throw in like Mariota, London, Pitts lineups there. But I think you're right. Just the way they're running that game, if Mariota is at his ceiling, I don't think it's coming with him having multiple pass catchers with him. I think it's because he did something on the ground there. It's not like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson who can do it either way. So I think you raise a good point there, especially with expected higher than usual ownership. So I think Mariota is definitely my cash quarterback, but I haven't made any Falcons stacks and GPPs in that sense. But let me ask you this: where are you on the other side of this game? Jacoby Brissett was the QB10 last week. The one thing that I missed on was the fact that Amari Cooper was going to actually be valuable with Brissett as the quarterback and his meager average depth of target. But I mean, he's leading the NFL in air yards so far and looking like a legitimate wide receiver 2 with upside. Are these guys you're targeting in DFS this week?
Not necessarily. I won't have any Brissett really in my player pool for GPPs. Really the guys that I'll be prioritizing for the Browns, absolutely comfortable running it back with David Njoku. Jacoby Brissett has made his career on supporting and getting a lot of tight ends handsome paydays. David Njoku is the more athletic option there in the tight end room for the Browns, and he absolutely exploded last week, right? Almost 24 fantasy points, 9 for 89 and 1. And this matchup against the Atlanta Falcons specifically, they're allowing tight ends to haul a ball in, to make a reception on 79.2% of their targets. So over the middle is very much so the part of this defense that you want to target. So the outside, we've talked about it a lot. AJ Terrell, Hayward on the other side, very, very difficult matchups. The Browns don't really run a whole lot of 3 receiver sets. They don't have guys with a good number of snaps out of the slot. So there's not a slot player to take advantage here. So it becomes David Njoku for me. And then the running backs are very much so in play. This is a Cleveland line that is near the top of the league. They're third in the league in yards before contact. Atlanta is one of the softer matchups for opposing rushers. So Cleveland, I'll really be looking more at the ground game and for another big week from Njoku.
I'm right there with you. And just to add to Njoku's thing, he played on 90% of their snaps last week, so he's clearly the guy. The Falcons have given up the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Why do you think they didn't raise his price? I mean, he was, I think, like 3,500 last week, although it's tough to gauge because then they play Thursday. They were a Thursday game, so it's kind of tough to gauge the price. But I mean, he seems like a bit of a gift at under 4,000, no?
He does, and I can tell that you've been playing DFS for a while because anytime something seems too good to be true, alarm bells start going off, right? It's like they clearly want us to play him at $3,700. For a cash perspective, I'll bite, right? I'll be the Huckleberry. For him to pay off $3,700 is such a low bar. But I get the same kind of spidey sense too, right? He should be into like the low to mid 4K range. Maybe when he does it again this week, we'll see him kind of jump into that range. But it does look peculiar as you sort top to bottom for the tight end position from a price standpoint.
DFS players aren't a trusting bunch when it comes to stuff like this.
Exactly.
Right. I will do when we go on. Speaking of tight ends, I will do a follow-up question to this when we get to another game and another cheap tight end. But we're going to move on. Before we go to the next game, we got a couple of questions in here season long. Oh, there's a third one too. So let's take these real quick. Ron Dreyer, great show. Thank you. I'm in a standard league. I need 3 of 4. Lamar Hunt. I'm wondering if that's Kareem Hunt. Gabe Davis. We're going to assume that's Kareem Hunt. Hunt, Gabe Davis, Rashad Bateman, and Chris Olave. My QB is Lamar Jackson. Standard league, non-PPR. Who's the one that sits of that bunch there for you? I have my answer, but I'll let you go first on this one.
Hunt, Gabe Davis, Bateman, and Chris Olave. I'm probably sitting Bateman out of that lot. I'm very worried about his role in this offense. And specifically in standard, right, it plays more like a touchdown only league. So to have Lamar in there and then to double back with Bateman, you've got a lot of eggs in that basket, and his role looks to be waning in this offense.
Yep, that was my answer as well, for sure. Yeah, and the reasons you gave are pretty much what I would have said too. I mean, you are banking on them, and if they don't score, if they don't connect for a touchdown, that's a big hole that you got yourself in there. So I would sit Bateman of those. I mean, of course, watch Gabe Davis's status. I think he's going to play, but he did pop up on the injury report. But yeah, Bateman's the one I would sit there. All right, so thank you for that. We got Sean Ryan here. Need to start 3. Zeke, Pollard, Miles Sanders, Michael Carter, and McKissick. Much appreciated. All right, geez. I mean, without knowing if that's PPR or not, or half or whatever, Sean, if you're still there, if you can pop that in, that might help. But I mean, I'm certainly going to play Zeke, even though he's not involved in the passing game. He's definitely still there between the tackles guy. Sanders, I would stick in there as well. Boston Scott's out, should mean a little bit higher carry share for him. And I mean, I guess Pollard would be the other one. I hate starting 2 from the same backfield, but it's not an imposing matchup. against Washington, and we saw them both succeed against the Giants, unfortunately, last Monday night. So I would go the 2 Dallas backs and Sanders there. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, Zeke and Sanders are the clear choice. Sanders has a really nice matchup as a pass catcher out of that backfield as well. For me, I can't bring myself to play Pollard and Zeke together. Pollard's just a few spots ahead of Carter on my rankings, so I'll go with Carter just to kind of diversify the lineup a little bit. But technically, if you're going straight rankings, Pollard is about 4 spots ahead of Carter.
Yeah, I'm kind of right with you there. I mean, I chose Pollard just because the pendulum seemed to swing Breece Hall's way a little bit last week, and I think it should continue that way. So, I mean, I went with Pollard as the third one just because we know what he is. But I mean, you're right. Playing the 2 Dallas backs together is really not a position that I like to be in there. But we hope we help with there. Zeke and Sanders for sure. And then, we kind of had our arguments for Pollard and Carter there. I think either one's okay. And neither one is one that you're getting excited about, though. All right, so thank you for that. And then finally, we have older Budweiser. I love that. Need one half point. ETN, Ramondre Stevenson, or Breece Hall. Need one for half point PPR. What do you think on that one, Eric?
I'll actually go with Breece Hall there. You brought up a salient point, right? Like the tide started to shift in his favor, and I think that the Jets ought to do that more and more as the season goes on. And this matchup against the Pittsburgh front without Watt up there, isn't necessarily anything to worry about, right? They're allowing the 10th most points to opposing running backs. They give up a fair number of catches and yards out of the backfield. So Breece really looked pretty solid in that expanded role, and I expect that to continue. So give me Hall.
Yep, I agree there too. I think Hall is in a position right now where you can put him in your lineups and at least feel okay about it. ETN is not in that position right now. James Robinson is still the guy there. And then Ramondre Stevenson, I don't want any part of that game. Really from any perspective. So yeah, Hall is my pick there too. All right, thank you for the questions. We hope we answered them adequately for you. We're going to continue on with the DFS slate. We probably got about 25 minutes left to discuss this. So we're going to kind of go through the rest of these games and get the kind of key plays. We probably won't break down as much as we did with the others, but get some of the key plays from this game for cash GPP, whether we like them as stacks. All right, so we're going to move on, Eric. We got Jacksonville and Philadelphia. We talked about the Jaguars before being an exciting, fun-looking young team to watch. And then Philadelphia, unfortunately, as a Giants fan, looks like they might be the real deal this year too. So where are you on this game? Is there any kind of particular cash plays that stand out for you, and are you interested in stacking it?
Yeah, so, first and foremost, Jalen Hurts is and probably forever will be on the cash game radar for me. He's got just such a safe floor with how involved he is in the rushing game. So very much so, he is on the radar for me for a cash game play. In terms of stacking this one up, it's a little tricky. I kind of think it's going to be a little bit more like that Washington game last week for the Eagles than it was for the Jaguars and the Chargers, right? This Eagles defense is really, really tough, right? For a few years, they've had a pretty decent front. They were above average on the perimeter, and you could just attack them over the middle. And they've really tightened up a lot of that defense in the kind of short and intermediate game over the middle of the field. So I think it's going to be a really tough out for Trevor Lawrence and crew. There's talks of Christian Kirk getting the Darius Slay treatment, which is kind of odd, just given how much Kirk lines up in the slot. But if he sees even incrementally more of Slay than he would otherwise, that's a downgrade for him. And on the Philly side, if you wanted to do a skinny stack, I think AJ Brown is the target to go alongside with Jalen Hurts. You could potentially also look to run back with Dallas Goedert, kind of an average matchup against the Jaguars. defensively. Probably not going to have a whole lot of Devonta Smith, right? He's kind of like a flex caliber wide receiver, and those are prone to booms or busts. And this Jacksonville defense is no slouch, right? They're average to above average in almost all categories, and that was not the expectation for them coming in. So I think this one comes in on the under, and therefore I'm not going to have a whole lot of stacking interest in it.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you too. And again, we talked about if we could bet. I would be betting the under on this one. It's 48.5. You mentioned Philadelphia's defense. Just a couple of things on that. They have 12 sacks already, which is the second most in the NFL, and 4.4 yards per attempt allowed, which is best in the NFL. The three quarterbacks they've faced so far: Goff, who finished QB 19 in week 1, Cousins, who was QB 24 in week 2, and Wentz, QB 29 in week 3. So, I mean, you're right on there. I think I'm taking the Eagles' defense side of this thing rather than anybody on the Jacksonville offensive side. And yeah, Devonta Smith he's a puzzler to me right now. But I think AJ Brown is the way I'd go to if you were doing a simple stack with Hurts as well.
I'll make you feel a little bit better as a Giants fan. 9 of those sacks came against Washington last week, right? They were just absolutely getting after him in terms of QB pressures and putting Wentz on the ground. So hopefully that cures your ails as a Giants fan.
Well, I saw the Dallas version of that coming at us in that one too. So it does a bit. It does, which is why I do think that the we'll get to that too. The Dallas defense is a fun one. They're taking on that Washington team this week, and they've got the best pass rush so far. So, I mean, that's a defense you can be playing in DFS too. But I digress. Moving on. So this is a real interesting one here too. Seattle, Detroit, and I got some specific questions for you on this one too. I want to see if you're handling this game. So, the Seattle side of things is, I think we can agree, is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, they've been a little bit more surprisingly good on offense than we thought they were going to be. Tyler Lockett has 22 targets over the last couple of weeks. He seems to be the one Geno Smith is favoring. So before we get into the mess that is Detroit here, are you interested in Tyler Lockett in a cash or GPP perspective? He's currently in my placeholder at 5,900.
I am very much so interested in Tyler Lockett. In the cash perspective, really good path from a points per dollar standpoint to get to value. He does seem to have fallen into favor with Geno Smith over the last couple of weeks. I think some of that is circumstantial based on the matchups he had. Right, they had Atlanta last week. We talk about attacking them from the slot. That's much more Lockett's territory than it is DK's. And this week is kind of more of the same, right? He's either going to see a Warrior or a Kuda. Those are definitely the matchups that you want and can be exploited up against this Detroit secondary. So I think that he is in another smash spot in week number 4.
Yeah, me too. And if you look at the same kind of archetype wide receivers that Detroit has faced, I mean, Curtis Samuel lit them up, and both Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne did as well. I think that was where Dotson scored as well too. So that right. Seemed like over the middle. Detroit has had no answer for that. So I'm really into Lockett this week as well. Anybody else on Seattle that you're looking at before we move to Detroit?
I think you can make an argument for Geno Smith at least being in the player pool. He leads the league in completion percentage and has for a couple of and his ADOT is like slightly above average, right? They're not like 3-yard deep attempts. And I've been pleasantly surprised by Geno, I guess at this point. Surprisingly enough, actually, it seems like he's going to be kind of popular. He's going to be like almost 8% owned, roughly. Certainly within the top 10 in terms of rostership in the DFS game, and rightfully so. I mean, they have an absolutely beautiful matchup. The other name that I'll mention is Rashad Penny, someone that is not going to be nearly as popular. Should be about sub 5%. Kind of got swept under the rug with all of the news floating around the league, but Travis Homer is on IR now. Ken Walker is very slowly being introduced into this offense and wasn't really utilized as a pass catcher out of the backfield all that much in college. So those third down looks that were going Homer's way should open back up to Rashad Penny as soon as this week. In, again, a fantastic matchup. I mean, Detroit is bottom of the league in terms of yards per carry allowed, in terms of yards per catch to opposing running backs. So very good spot for Penny, and I don't think he's going to get a whole lot of spotlight put on him. So he'll be someone that I'll be trying to fit into my GPP builds for sure.
He's definitely in mine too, and especially with some of these expensive passing stacks. Like if you want those Bills Ravens stacks we talked about, Penny is a perfect fit at 4,900, which is just too cheap. I mean, he was last week he played 69% snap share. He had 15 touches. I mean, Walker was at 13%. And what's his face? Not Homer, the other one. DJ Dallas was at 20%. So I mean, this is Penny's backfield right now. So I mean, I think that's a great call, and he's definitely in my GPP plays as well. I even think, I mean, if you're in a pinch, I think he's cash playable. I don't think it's one. You want floor with cash. I don't think he has the one that we really want. That Lockett would be my Seattle target there. But I mean, I think he's okay. Just at such a cheap price tag if you need that to get every other player you want. All right, so Detroit, this is where everybody's kind of pulling their hair out. So, it started the week out that a very simple tale for Detroit, that DeAndre Swift was most likely going to sit. We were all going to play Jamal Williams, and even if he busted, we were all going to bust together, and that would just be the end of it. But now, Amon-Ra St. Brown has been ruled out, and DJ Chark has been ruled out. So we are in a position where we've got Jamal Williams with the lion's share of the carries. We've got Josh Reynolds as the wide receiver 1. We've got, don't even know who's the wide receiver 2, I guess is Khalif Raymond. And we've got TJ Hawkinson, who is in line for, a mountainous amount of targets here. So let's kind of talk about this a little bit from both a cash and a GPP perspective. I think this is an important one to stop because people are going to want to know how to use Detroit tonight. So, I mean, I think Jamal Williams is one that I'm going to eat the chalk on no matter what in cash, at least on DraftKings. FanDuel is a little bit trickier because he's priced up a little bit more there. But on DraftKings at 6,100, I think I'm pretty comfortable at least just eating the chalk on Jamal Williams. I think he's still going to be as popular as we thought. So I'm okay riding that wave. He's absolutely a GPP fade for me. So where are you on Jamal Williams? And give us your best take on those Detroit pass catchers.
Yeah, I am in lockstep with you with regard to Jamal Williams, right? Like in these cases, I mean, $6,100 is probably a little bit more than I would like to spend on him in general. But for a cash game, right, like you can go down with the ship and everyone else is going to be on him. He's projected to be, the most highly rostered player on the entire slate. So if he busts and you're on him, you're in good company and you're not entirely cooked. GPP, specifically because of that price tag and with how popular he's going to be, I'm definitely looking another direction. I'll have some shares, but he's projected in the high 20s, 28, 27% rostership. So I'll probably be more in like the 10 to 12% range where I have him. In terms of the pass catchers, I mean, this is going to be tricky. If this isn't TJ Hawkinson's week, I'm officially done with TJ Hawkinson. We've been waiting for his year 3 breakout for like 6 years now. He's running routes, he's getting targets. If he can't convert them into meaningful fantasy production this week at $4,100, like I absolutely love his spot, but I just want an out in the universe that I will be done with Hawkinson if he doesn't get over the line from a productivity standpoint. The pass catchers, Josh Reynolds is definitely the one. Khalif Raymond is probably the one that I'm most interested in so much as in his limited snaps, about half of them have been coming from the slot. That matchup with Kobe Bryant, the slot corner for Seattle, is fantastic. He's allowing like almost 20 yards per catch in his coverage, well into the 70s in terms of catch rate on passes that he defenses. So that's probably the guy that I'd be looking at. Should be like 1 to 3% owned unless we get some, big report that they're fully behind him and he's going to get a full complement of snaps. So interesting GPP leverage. Even deeper dive, Quintez Cephas. He's had opportunities in the past where there have been guys out for this Detroit offense. So there is a world where he steps into 45, 50% of snaps, maybe more if they're trailing. And as a sub 1% guy, should be in the player pool on GPPs, but he's a min price guy that is a dart throw. So he also brings a fair amount of risk along with him.
I like it. Yeah, we had a Cephas call in our chat there too. We do have some questions. We'll get to you in just a second. So I'm gonna wrap this Detroit thing up because you made your pitch for David Njoku back when we did the Browns. We've both kind of recognized that TJ Hawkinson is going to be one of the most sought after tight ends this week. He's 4,100 and Njoku is 3,700. So if you got the money for both in cash, which one are you taking? You got the money for both in GPP, which one are you taking? Just in a vacuum, stack aside.
I would probably go Hawk in cash, and I would probably go Njoku in GPP.
That's where I am too. So I'll give you a follow-up question. That's pretty much exactly where I am too. I think he's another one like Jamal Williams that you kind of have to eat in cash. But certainly fine fading him in GPP, especially for Njoku, who we've sold too. So a last question on this too. I know I said that before, but if someone asked you, I don't have the money for Hawkinson. I got $3,800 left for a tight end. Should I blow up my whole team to get to Hawkinson, or would you tell him that Njoku is fine, even with the rostership being much higher on Hawkinson?
Oh yeah, I would absolutely route them the way of David Njoku, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your world, right? $3,800. I would also take a look at Dawson Knox. Logan Thomas can be fine. And the reason why I mentioned that specifically, you talked about it off the top, right? You had some winning builds, and then Tinker Time got into our heads, and we gave it all away, right? So if you arrive to a point where you're confident with what you've put together in terms of your roster construction, don't blow it all up to go get $200, right? There are almost always viable options, especially at that end of the salary scale, right? Like we're talking about such an incremental difference, one player to the other, to where you can get away with a David Njoku, a Dawson Knox, and have the rest of your roster carry you.
Yeah, and it's not a death sentence either. This is something, I've been playing DFS for over 10 years now, and this is something that I still have trouble learning, is that, like if I play Njoku, I'm always afraid that, if Hawkinson beats him at the higher rostership, that I'm dead. And it just isn't that way. Hawkinson gets 20 and Njoku gets a 0. That's a bit of a different story. But we're not looking at projections that's that, that is right, that much apart like that. So, I don't think you need to go blow up your whole team just to get those. All right, awesome. I think we did that. I think we did that justice here. Detroit's a difficult spot here. We have a ton of questions here. We probably got about 10, 15 minutes left, maybe 12 minutes for the end. We'll kind of go rapid fire on the rest of the games just to talk about some other key players that we've got in there. But let's get to these questions first. So Joseph Montez, who would you start? Bateman, McKenzie, or McLaurin? Full PPR, only one, and I have Josh Allen at QB. I'll let you take this one first.
I think I'm going McLaurin here. He'll probably see more of Trayvon Diggs than anyone. Trayvon Diggs isn't all that tough of an out, right? He's just kind of league average. He just makes flashy plays and gets turnovers, but also those types of players can get a little aggressive and let someone behind him, right? So, Isaiah McKenzie, a little too fringy. We've talked about our concerns with Bateman, so give me McLaurin.
Yeah, I agree with you on that as well. Trayvon Diggs, I mean, he gets a little bit too much credit. People don't want to target receivers against him, but you're right. He's a big time interception guy, but he can be beaten, especially when he kind of sells himself out to do that. So I think we're in agreement on that one as well. All right, next one from David Bednarik. PPR, McKenzie or Sutton? This is an easy one for me. I mean, we're looking at Sutton is the wide receiver 17 on the year in PPR. McKenzie's wide receiver 35. I'm not. I mean, obviously the Russell Wilson thing is a little bit concerning with the way he's played so far, but Sutton is producing every game. I mean, that's really not a question for me. Do you find it closer than I do? But I mean, I'm pretty much dead set on
No,
Sutton
it's definitely Sutton, but it makes me wonder if there's like breaking Gabe Davis news that we've missed. So I don't see anything.
Yeah, I
but
know.
Maybe that's
Right? Yeah,
why
there's another
some,
McKenzie question down here too.
some excitement behind McKenzie.
I know we're telling people, nah, sit McKenzie. Meanwhile, Gabe Davis has been ruled out. I might check Twitter while we're answering the next question.
As of 4 hours ago, he's quoted as saying, "I'm playing Sunday." So
okay,
that's
that's
the latest report. If he's been ruled out, then yes, McKenzie is on. He's more on the radar. It's still Sutton in that case for Worth.
Yes, it is, but it is definitely closer. I'm going to Twitter while we're doing this thing. All right, Scotty boy, need a defense. Minnesota versus beat up New Orleans or Seattle versus beat up Detroit. That's a pretty good one. I mean, I wouldn't put too much into the whole defensive choice there. I'm leaning. Both of these teams have good offensive lines. I'm leaning Minnesota's. We talked about the scoring in London and trends like that. So I'm going with Minnesota there, but I get the other side too. What about you?
Yeah, I'm also going with Minnesota here. For me, like this is more of like a points allowed consideration. I don't think either of them are really all that likely to create turnovers. I actually would have preferred facing Jameis Winston if I was rostering Minnesota's defense because he likes to push the ball deep and give up an interception or two. I think Dalton will probably take care of the ball, but in reality, Minnesota can probably keep New Orleans to 14 points or less. So that'd be the way that I would go.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I agree. And that's another thing too. I'm gonna kind of segue here into the next game. So we got the Giants and the Bears. And again, we got about 10 minutes. We're gonna kind of go as fast as we can through some of these other games. The Giants and the Bears are currently two of the highest rostered team defenses on here. We've already spoken about Khalil Herbert. And Saquon Barkley, I think, is the big giant that you want in play here. It's the way they've been leaning on him. Neither one of these teams has shown that they're capable of stopping the run. So I think both those running backs are in play. I want to talk about the defenses quick, but is there any other player on either one of these rosters that you're interested in using in DFS besides Barkley and Herbert?
I mean, I'll have a rotation of the guessing game of New York Giants pass catchers, right? But I'm not starting my build around any pieces really not named Saquon Barkley. I'll have some Herbert. I'll probably be a little bit underweight.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one too. I'm still deciding on Herbert and Cash as well. I think he's in my build right now, but I'm exploring ways that I might like better. And like you said, Richie James is fine at 4,000. Kenny Galladay is at 3,900. I mean, we've hit rock bottom with him. So I mean, if you want to be on the mentality that he has to get some work this week with all the receivers they're missing, I go for it in GPPs at 3,900. But if there's a zero to be had out of that, then just remember that zero was always possibly there. So real quick on the defenses here. The Giants and the Bears are pretty heavily owned here, and I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. And it's kind of reasons you talked about that. With Minnesota, when you roster a defense, you're really looking for a team that is going to be facing a lot more dropbacks and has those sack and turnover opportunities. I don't really think we're going to see that from either one of these teams. I think both are okay to be doing as defenses because the offenses are kind of disjointed, but I'm just a little uncomfortable with that as a defense there. What do you think?
Yeah, I follow your logic in that like this is going to be a very slow paced game, so the ability to rack up sacks, to create opportunities for turnovers will be limited. I mean, both of these teams do an okay job in terms of actually generating sacks whenever they're applying pressure, right? It's like 20% for Chicago and 18% for the Giants, kind of top third in the league. So when they send guys, they do a pretty good job of getting to the quarterback and getting them on the ground. But ultimately, almost as a right, anytime that there's chalk in the defensive category, I'm just fading outright. Like there are so many other situations that I would rather be in for with a defense that is about the same amount of money, maybe a little bit less expensive, and is 1% rostered instead of a 8 or a 6% rostered team in these two cases.
Yeah. There's so much variance in defense that usually it's a money saving thing for me. And I wish that they were cheaper. The Giants are 3,100. I just don't think they're with 3 sacks through 3 games. I just don't think that they've shown that they're worthy of that price tag. Leonard Williams is out again for them. So it's okay if you want to do it, but I'm not throwing up the money just get up there just because they're the chalk defense. All right, so moving on a couple of things real quick here. Chargers Houston. What's your take on this game?
Yeah, this is really the Austin Eckler show, right? I have concerns about his workload in this offense and his kind of rest of season value. But if anyone is going to have a top 10 day on in any sort of committee, it's Austin Eckler this week against the Texans. I mean, they're just hemorrhaging yards on the ground to opposing running backs. I think they're third in yards per carry. They're hemorrhaging receptions out of the backfield. This is very much so the smash spot for running backs. They're allowing their opponents to get almost a yard and a half before contact when rushing the ball out of the backfield. So this has to be the Austin Eckler week. Herbert should be fine. I'm not really interested enough in this game from a stacking standpoint to where I'm going to have much of him. So it's really Eckler or bust for me.
Yeah, and Eckler's, you're right. I mean, you hit it right on the head. He's got, even if he does, he's under 3 yards per carry, which is causing panic all over, Twitter because he was drafted in the top 5 overall usually. But he's still got 22 targets, and like you said, this is the matchup for him. I mean, if we see something bad out of him this week, maybe we can start to look and see how this Chargers team is actually going to use him. But yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. Washington, Dallas. This is another interesting one as well in a divisional matchup. I mentioned, you mentioned that Philadelphia racked up 9 sacks on that Washington offensive line. Now they get a Dallas team that is pass rushing even better than Philadelphia. We saw, I'm just looking it up real quick to see how many total sacks it is they've had so far. I think it was almost 15, 13 sacks through 3 weeks. I think if you want to kind of get away from the field and do a pay-up defense at 3,500, they're pretty good. CeeDee Lamb gets that thing we call that Monday night discount where the player doesn't get priced in time because they play on Monday night and they've already released the slates. $6,700. He's got 34 targets through 3 weeks. Cooper Rush, he hasn't missed a beat. Where are you sitting on Lamb?
Yeah, I like Lamb a lot in this game. I think he'll generally be overlooked. I also love that Monday night discount. Right, it's hard to pass up. And his role in the offense. Right, we talked about this a lot when Cooper Rush was coming in. Like his role in this offense has maintained the same. It's just the value, the quality of his opportunity has come down a little bit. Probably not as much as we were anticipating. Right, Cooper Rush has played admirably, and the matchup for CeeDee Lamb, who I mean, he moves around the field a lot, right? So he's not going to have, kind of a singular matchup, but all these matchups are great, right? Fuller's given up touchdowns. William Jackson has allowed like 90% catch rate. St. Juice is allowing almost a yard per route covered, which is, one of the higher rates in the NFL. So wherever he lines up, CeeDee Lamb should be able to be pretty effective. And again, I think that he'll be a little bit under rostered relative to where I think he should be.
Yep, I'm with you on that too. So we are about out of time here. Again, we sometimes get carried away when these excellent games, but if you want to see maybe some of the, I mean, we didn't touch on New England and Green Bay, the Jets, Pittsburgh. I think we're kind of in agreement that we're not really looking at those games anyway. But if you want to head over to Football Diehards, we have write-ups galore from everybody else. We are going to take these last couple of questions in here before we get out of here. But make sure you check out all the great work at Football Diehards. We've got cash games, GPPs, leverage plays, all the like, ownership projections. So make sure you kind of get on that train and check out what we got going here. We got one last question in the chat here from the Joker. Who to start for flex full PPR? Jeff Wilson Jr., Rashad Penny, Ramondre Stevenson. For me, that's going to be Penny for reasons we talked about before. What about you?
It is Penny for me as well.
All right, so we are both with you on Penny. Hopefully that he can do against Detroit what other running backs had done. There is one final question I saw in the chat there that I want to kind of get to, as from Steven Crowder. He says, why is Dortch still so cheap? We didn't really get to the Arizona-Carolina game, but I think it's worth mentioning Dortch. Is there anything you kind of want to throw about him? Are you on him? He's 5,000. I mean, he's getting peppered with targets. We've got some questionable tags. Rondale Moore and Marquise Brown are both questionable. Obviously, Hopkins is still out. Are you on Dortch this week? Because he's really not getting much play, and he is kind of still underpriced, I think, for his production.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of Dortch. While he's relatively inexpensive, his price tag is walking up, week over week, and it's almost kind of a zero-sum game for me, right? If Marquise Brown is ruled out, that doesn't really change Dortch's role in this offense. He is still operating as their slot receiver, but he's going to be far more popular. So that would be a point where I'm not trying to have a whole lot of him on my roster. And specifically, right at that 5K price point, there are a number of other guys that I would rather be on. Noah Brown specifically, I think, is going to be a really interesting leverage play. He's $100 less. He also has those same good matchups that CeeDee Lamb is carrying. So, back when he was $4,100, 4K, very much so heavily represented in the pool, but not quite there for me now that he's up to 5 and not really in the most desirable game situation.
Yeah, I found myself in kind of the same scenario there, I think, with Dortch. I mean, I might go back and look a little bit, especially if we get, a thinned out wide receiver core. You're right with Marquise Brown. I don't think him sitting is going to affect that. I think if Rondale Moore happens to play, I don't think he's going to. But that's a little bit more concerning for Dortch because they run the same type of routes. Dortch is an odd one there. All right, so we appreciate everybody joining us. We appreciate the questions in the chat. Eric, any final thoughts from you before we sign off here?
Rapid fire. I like Connor from Arizona. Pittman and Taylor should both smash. Find someone who loves you the way that Trubisky loves Deontay Johnson. Elijah Moore is interesting, and Dobbs might be not the worst dart throw at 4.5K.
Yeah, so we gotta kind of, when we get the bye weeks, we get less games here. We get to spend more time on these games. So we apologize if we miss plays. I mean, I can't believe I said, well, we're not interested in Jets Pittsburgh. Of course, Deontay Johnson is in play there. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. We are always open to suggestions. We appreciate your questions. Eric, it was a pleasure to talk football with you again. Good luck in all your games. I am Jamie. Follow us both at JAC3600, Eric at Fantasy Nav. That's FANTASYNAV. And we will see you back here next Saturday. same time, 9 o'clock Eastern on the YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great night and enjoy football tomorrow.